is he the greatest unknown guitar player? At the time,
he doesn't flex, he doesn't chase. Joe Bonamassa just listens, then lifts those who move him, and once they hit his radar, they stay there, forever.
he was achieving those incredible tones that he still gets to this day with old gear.
He's not just one of the most skilled blues players of this era. He's a student, a historian, a disciple of the guitar's past and present. For decades, Joe has toured the world, shattered expectations, and revived the blues for an entirely new generation. But under the flash and the speed, there's something deeper. His obsession with greatness. The kind of greatness that doesn't care about charts or headlines. The kind that can't be faked. The kind that lives in your hands and speaks through 6 strings. Joe doesn't follow trends, he follows tone. And when he finds the real thing, he never forgets. Blues Deluxe, Time Clocks, Live at the Royal Albert Hall. His albums cover every corner of the genre, but behind the firepower, there's always a quiet reverence. A nod to the giants who shaped his sound. And when Joe talks about those players, the ones who rewired his brain and rewrote his path, you hear something different in his voice. Not just admiration, devotion.
My admiration for the late great Jeff Beck. I shudder even saying those words.
He's jammed with hundreds, but only a few ever made his shortlist. The chosen ones who gave him chills and taught him something bigger than music. Here are the 5 guitarists Joe Bonamassa holds above all. Tone kings, soul bringers, and no one else has ever replaced them. Number 1. Eric Johnson. Some guitarists play notes. Eric Johnson plays colors. Bonamassa didn't just admire him. He studied him like scripture. From the first time Joe heard Cliffs of Dover, he said it felt like a new dimension opened up. Johnson's tone, his phrasing, his control, it wasn't blues, jazz, or rock. It was his, and it was surgical. Joe once said, "He's the only guitarist I've ever heard where every single note matters. Even the silence between them." That wasn't just praise, it was a standard. Joe credits Eric Johnson with teaching him restraint, discipline, the idea that speed means nothing without clarity. And more than once he's called Ar Via Musicom, the album that rewired his brain. When Bonamassa was a teenager, he tried to learn Cliffs of Dover note for note. He got halfway through and stopped, not because he couldn't play it, but because it didn't feel right. That was the first time he understood. Tone isn't technique, it's identity.
I learned a lot about, putting rigs together based on Eric Johnson.
Johnson wasn't flashy on stage, he was almost still, but his sound was enormous, layered, pure, impossible to fake. Joe said it was like he had a studio compressor in his fingers. He didn't attack the guitar, he listened to it. And Johnson's influence didn't just shape Joe's playing, it shaped his ears. He learned to hear frequencies, to carve space between instruments, to respect the quiet. That's why Bonamassa's mixes breathe, that's why his solos build instead of just explode. Joe once told Guitar World, Eric could have been a violinist or a synth guy, but he chose the guitar. And we're all better for it. But it wasn't just the technical side. Johnson also showed Joe that you could be gentle and still sound massive. That you didn't need to dominate the stage to command it. The emotion wasn't in the volume, it was in the vibrato, the glide, the phrasing that felt like speech. And here's the thing Joe never forgot. Eric Johnson never tried to sound like anyone else. He wasn't part of a movement or a trend. He built his own universe and invited people in. Joe has said more than once that if he had to explain perfect tone to someone who's never played a note in their life, he'd just play them Eric Johnson. He doesn't play guitar. He paints with it. That's why I'll never stop listening. It's not just respect, it's loyalty. Even now, with decades behind him and hundreds of legends in his contacts, Bonamassa still circles back to Johnson like a compass finding north. Not for nostalgia, for clarity. Number 2. Stevie Ray Vaughan. Before Joe Bonamassa ever hit a stage, Stevie Ray Vaughan had already shaped the kind of player he'd become. It wasn't just admiration, it was obsession. Bonamassa didn't just listen to Texas Flood, he lived inside it. He said he rewound the tape until it stretched thin, trying to decode what made it feel so massive. SRV didn't just play blues, he brought it back from the edge. And for a young guitarist in upstate New York, it hit like a lightning bolt. Bonamassa once said, Stevie made blues dangerous again. Raw, sweaty, emotional, he gave it teeth. There was nothing polished about Stevie. He played like every note was dragging him through fire. The bends weren't clean, they were alive. Bonamassa learned early that perfection wasn't the goal, truth was. And Stevie Ray Vaughan played like the truth couldn't wait. Bonamassa was just 11 years old when he tried to learn scuttle-button. He said it nearly broke him, not because of the speed, but because of the feel. He nailed the notes, but something was still missing. That was when he realized timing is mechanical, but groove is spiritual.
We all play like Stevie. We all have this thing that kind of brings us to Texas Flood, you know?
For years, Joe played like he had something to prove. Speed, precision, complexity. But Stevie, he slowed down time. He didn't need 10 notes. He only needed one, the right one. Bonamassa once told Premier Guitar, he didn't play blues licks. He played sentences, complete thoughts. That changed how I thought about soloing forever. Even now, Joe still calls SRV the ultimate bridge between blues and rock. He had Hendrix's spirit, Albert King's weight, and his own fire. Joe never got to meet him, but when people ask who he would have given anything to jam with, he doesn't hesitate. And there's more than just musical influence, it's personal. Joe has said that during rough years, burnout, pressure, doubt, he'd go back to Lenny or Tin Pan Alley just to feel grounded again. He once said, "If I ever forget why I do this, I put on Stevie, and suddenly I remember." It wasn't just the way SRV played, it was the risk in every phrase, like the whole thing could fall apart, but never did. That edge became a blueprint. Joe studied it, borrowed from it, even paid tribute to it in countless shows. But he never tried to copy it, because you can't fake what Stevie had, you can only honor it. Bonamassa doesn't call Stevie Ray Vaughan the best blues player of all time. He calls him the most important, the turning point, the spark that lit a generation on fire. Number 3. Jeff Beck. There are guitarists who can shred, and then there's Jeff Beck, who didn't need to. Bonamassa didn't grow up trying to play like Beck. He tried to understand why Beck played at all. There was something defiant about him. No lyrics, no formulas, just raw emotion, bent through technique no one else could touch. Joe once said, Beck didn't play guitar solos, he had conversations with the instrument. Beck's phrasing wasn't flashy, it was alive. He'd glide, bark, weep, or disappear mid-note. It felt unpredictable but never chaotic. Joe said it was like watching someone surf without a board, just instinct, balance, and air.
If you ask the who's who of anyone who their favorite rock guitar player is, going to be Eddie Van Halen, and it's going to be Jeff Beck.
When Beck passed in 2023, Bonamassa didn't just post a tribute. He stopped his tour to play a stripped-down cover of Where Were You? Not for attention, for respect. Jeff Beck never cared about being called the best. He walked away from fame more than once. But for those paying attention, he was the innovator. Fuzz, feedback, fusion, jazz rock, silence. He never stood still. And Bonamassa noticed. He once said in an interview with Rick Beato, Beck could make a guitar sound like a singer. He didn't bend strings, he bent reality. Bonamassa always admired how Beck avoided the spotlight. No excess, no pandering, just unfiltered expression. It wasn't about speed or showmanship, it was about intent. Every sound Beck made had weight, even the ones that weren't there. Joe has said that most guitar players try to impress. Beck tried to say something, and that made him terrifying, because if you were listening, you felt exposed. On stage, Beck could be delicate one moment, violent the next. That dynamic range stuck with Bonamassa. He called it the most fearless playing he'd ever heard, and despite Beck's god-tier status, Joe said he never saw arrogance in him, just experimentation, curiosity, danger. He once put it like this, Jeff Beck never repeated himself, that's what made him timeless. That's the trait Bonamassa tries hardest to emulate. Not the tone, not the licks, the risk, the refusal to be boxed in. You'll hear it in Joe's quieter moments, the phrasing that doesn't follow rules, that drifts, that questions. That's Beck. That's the echo of an artist who turned the guitar into a shape-shifting force. Bonamassa doesn't call Jeff Beck the most influential guitarist. He calls him the most important to listen to, because once you hear him, you never stop chasing that kind of freedom. Number 4. Danny Gatton. Bonamassa never called him famous, he called him unmatched. Danny Gatton didn't chase stardom, he just played, And in Joe Bonamassa's words, he played like he had every genre wired into his fingertips. Jazz, country, blues, rockabilly. Gatton didn't blend them. He made them talk to each other. Joe once said, Danny Gatton could outplay anyone, but he never wanted the spotlight. He just wanted to be left alone with his Telecaster. Bonamassa discovered Gatton through a bootleg tape when he was a teenager. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Volume swells that sounded like a pedal steel. Chicken picking faster than most shredders. Joe thought it was a joke until he tried to play it himself. He couldn't. Not even close. Gatton's right hand moved like a machine, but the emotion never left. He could rip through a bebop line and land on a country twang without blinking. Joe once said that listening to Gatton was like watching someone perform brain surgery with barbecue sauce. It didn't make sense, but it worked.
I met this guitar player named Danny Gatton, and he kind of was the first guy to really take me under his wing. I was about 11.
There's a reason Danny Gatton was called the Humbler, not by fans, but by other guitarists. He didn't need a band to make something swing, he just needed space. And when Joe tried to copy his feel, he said it nearly broke his spirit. Bonamassa later admitted, I practiced Danny's licks for 6 months. I got the notes but not the soul. That's when I realized some people are just built different. But Gatton's genius came at a cost. He never wanted the fame, but he felt the weight of being ignored. The music industry didn't know where to place him. Too country for jazz, too technical for blues, too humble for rock. He played for bar crowds who didn't clap. He worked in garages when he wasn't on stage. He didn't network. He didn't chase labels. He just played. And one day, he stopped. In 1994, Danny Gatton ended his life in his Maryland garage. No farewell tour, no final album, just silence. Joe never forgot that. In multiple interviews, he's mentioned Gatton's death, not to sensationalize it, but to underline the loss. What happens when genius slips through the cracks? He once said, Danny Gatton was the greatest guitarist no one ever heard, and now they never will. Bonamassa keeps Gatton's memory alive by covering his songs, talking about him on stage, telling young players to look him up. Because to Joe, Danny Gatton wasn't a footnote. He was a warning. That talent alone isn't enough. That soul can't always survive the silence. And sometimes the loudest voices in music are the ones we forgot to hear in time. Number 5. B.B. King. Some musicians change your life. B.B. King changed Joe Bonamassa's entire path. They met when Joe was just 12 years old, still a kid, still wearing a blazer that didn't quite fit. But when B.B. invited him on stage, something happened. The crowd disappeared. The nerves dropped. And Joe learned the most important lesson of his life. You don't need to be loud to be heard. Bonamassa later said, he taught me that 2 notes, played with intent, can hit harder than 100 played fast. B.B. wasn't just Joe's hero. He was his mentor, his anchor, his reminder that music wasn't about technical display, it was about soul. And once King took him under his wing, Joe never looked at the fretboard the same way again. The two toured together, over 20 shows. Night after night, Joe watched B.B. play with less and say more. He saw how King didn't need to run. He waited, let the note bloom, let the silence settle.
I met B.B. King May 24th, 1990, and it changed my life.
And B.B. didn't lecture. He didn't critique. He just gave encouragement, stories, stage time. Joe once said that just hearing B.B.'s laugh backstage taught him more about presence than any solo ever could. In a 2010 interview, Joe said, B.B. was the blueprint. He showed me how to speak through a guitar without raising your voice. Even now, Joe talks about B.B. like he's still in the room. He still plays his songs, still mentions him on stage, still hears his voice in moments of doubt, telling him to slow down, to breathe. And when B.B. King passed in 2015, Bonamassa didn't just post a tribute, he dedicated a tour to him, a full setlist reworked to honor the man who gave him his first real break, and his first real lesson in restraint. Joe once said, B.B. didn't just open the door, he handed me the key and told me to walk through. There's a photo from their early shows. B.B. with his signature smile. Joe, just a kid, eyes wide, guitar in hand. It looks like a passing of the torch. And maybe it was. Because for all of Joe's heroes, only one got this close. Only one felt like home. And for Bonamassa, the list of favorites isn't about fame, speed, or legacy. It's about feel, and nobody ever felt the blues like B.B. King. Joe Bonamassa never chased trends. He never shouted to be heard. He just played, and remembered the ones who made him want to. Not every player makes that list. Some had the chops, fewer had the feel, and only a handful could pull something out of Joe that even he didn't know was there. These 5 did, and once they did, he never let them go. So who do you think almost made the cut? Or maybe should have? Drop your guess in the comments. And if you're the kind of person who hears more in one note than most hear in a solo, you already know what to do. Like, subscribe, and get early access to deep dives, unreleased stories, and guitar ghosts that shape the sound. Because in Joe Bonamassa's world, it's not about who played the fastest, it's about who stayed, the ones who never left the room.